I'm going live.
Okay.
Yeah. So, hello everyone. Welcome. Sorry we are late, but welcome to today's live stream. There are 109 people viewing already. So, that is a good start. Let me welcome my guests. We have Mansi, we have Jenil, we have Tanya. I'm so glad that you guys could join in. Uh, Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Okay, so this is, first of all, I want you all to relax. This is absolutely new for me as well. And I know it's new for you, but we're just going to have some fun. We are all students here. And what we are going to do is basically talk a little bit about learning, about academics. And I think that is what we are most comfortable talking about because that's what we've been doing most of our lives anyway. And we're just going to talk about what did we learn so far, how did we learn it, and let's see how the conversation goes. Okay? So there's no real big plan. Let's just go with the flow. Is that okay?
Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So first thing I would like to do is to get to know you a little bit so that I know, where you guys are coming from when you say things. So let's start. Mansi, can you just run us through what you do? What did you learn? Just tell us who you are, basically.
Okay. Uh, so basically, I did my CA. I'm a qualified chartered accountant. Feels amazing to say it. I don't say it often.
Okay.
I recently became one, end of 2019.
Excellent.
After which I have continued working where I was interning before. So I work in investment banking.
Oh, wow. And you recently started working.
Yeah, but I was also working there before my exam as an intern.
Okay.
I recently joined the same company full time.
How nice. Okay. And so you studied to be a chartered accountant, which is considered one of the most difficult exams to clear. So excellent. So you are one great person to talk to about how to study. I'm so glad you're here. Tanya, I know you're a medical student. Just run us through what you're doing.
So I did my schooling from an ICSE school. Then the same pattern, I dropped a year, and
Okay.
then I gave the entrances.
Yeah.
And now I'm in the final year of medical school in Meerut, UP.
Okay.
And yeah, hoping it will be over soon. But
Wow. Okay. I hate to tell you, but you're just starting out.
I know, I know.
They'll tell you that this is the last exam you have to give, but
Yeah.
they're lying. It's not true.
That's the biggest lie ever told
It's
to
the
Indian
biggest lie.
kids.
Correct. It's the biggest lie. What about you, Jenil? What are you up to?
So after I did my 12th, I decided to do computer science, and I did that for 4 years. And then between when I was doing my CS, I got into cryptocurrency and Bitcoin and all that stuff.
Oh,
So
wow.
after I graduated, I was in the fintech crypto space, and I was looking for a job in that area. So I worked at a cryptocurrency firm, and I did software development engineering for 1 year, and I did that in San Francisco, and now I'm back here in India, and I'm trying to pursue something else. I'm trying to work on a startup, and yeah, I'm just researching. So yeah, I learned coding for the last
Oh,
4 or 5 years.
amazing. Amazing. Okay. So we have like a very diverse group here. Like we have really studied very different things. Probably the way we've approached academics is also different. So I think this is like a very good group to talk about learning in general. Yeah. So one thing I wanted to start off with was how did you guys learn? Did you when you were studying? So for example, Mansi, when you were studying chartered accountancy, did you have a system in which you approached your academics? So you had those big CA textbooks. Did you have a
Yes.
system to how to break it down, how to understand this?
Yeah, I mean, you really cannot approach CA without that. There
Tell
are
me,
too many books.
how
So I
many?
guess
How many did you have
most
to read?
I had two entire cabinets filled with books. I did not bother counting them.
Okay, so how did you go about it?
So, I mean, this is most of us do join coaching classes and all. So, we do get some sort of guidance,
Right,
but you just have to approach it conceptually and learn the concepts. That's what we most focus on and
right,
practice a lot.
right,
Because in the exam, anything can be asked. Even stuff you say is not in the book, but you should still know it.
right. There is that,
So,
even that is a scam, that this is not in the book, or this is not part of the portion. There is no such thing.
exactly.
So every student who has given NEET exams, so the postgraduate NEET exam, knows that there is no such thing as portion. You can get asked anything, anything. So in my NEET PG exam, I was asked about the area of the square in the mosquito net.
Oh yeah, and
And that became kind of like a legendary question after that.
it was, even in my class in PSM, like third year, we had the subject which he's talking about,
Right.
and we were specifically told that this was asked in NEET, ki net ka kya square ka size.
Correct. So that was asked. That was asked the first time when I was giving an exam, and it just blew my mind that there is no limit to what we are expected to know. Anything can be asked, and it is a legitimate question as far as academic, as far as exams are concerned. Now, and same for these new subjects, like for example, cryptocurrency. It is not an established field. We are still learning about it. We're still sort of
Right, right.
right. It's an evolving
Mhm.
subject. So,
Yeah.
as opposed to medicine, which has been around for so long, how do you approach something that is every day there'll be something new, and you are making it up basically, because cryptocurrency, the whole thing is basically based on a white
Yeah.
paper, right?
It's based on a white paper. There's a lot of scams. So the best thing that we did, so I started researching it through like just Google Scholar. I used to just search it
Right.
and then read research papers, and I had a very good mentor,
Okay.
and she was sort of guiding me through it. So I used to read those research papers line by line and then annotate those papers, make I used to take notes on Google Docs.
Okay.
So I used to type out my notes, what I understood from it, and then we used to discuss it on every Friday.
Oh,
And then we
excellent.
used to get validation from the market. So we used to look at existing companies, how they're doing and how they're implementing it. So at that time there would, and even today there's two big prominent companies, which is Ethereum, and then
And Bitcoin.
and Bitcoin. I mean, it's not a company, but it's a
Oh,
concept.
okay, okay, okay. So, which is the other
um,
company?
it's Coinbase. So
Okay.
there's lots of them,
Yeah,
but
Ripple.
these are the
No,
two
what was
big
it? What
ones.
was the other one? Ripple. No,
Ripple.
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 Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So there's a lot of them, and these are just protocols.
Right.
They're companies, but inherently these are protocols.
Correct.
So we used to study them. We used to study their white papers, and then we used to do research on them and learn
Excellent.
through that. So that was the process behind all of this.
Wow. So you are basically trying to cryptocurrency as a subject itself is just forming, and you are trying to cut that subject and try to understand it as it forms.
Exactly. So I had a professor. He used to teach cryptography in college, and it was a required course. You had to take security in cryptography,
Right.
and he sort of guided me into it. And from him, I learned all these things. And cryptocurrency is a very subsection, like 1 or 2% of what cryptography and math and computer science is.
Right.
So even when I wanted to apply for masters, what my research was on, like there's no actual institutions
To
that are
teach
doing research
this.
to teach this exactly. So
Yeah.
there was no point on pursuing that specifically.
Which makes it a
So
very unique field actually, because nobody else, none of us have that problem. We have institutions, we have very well formed knowledge structures that you just have to go and attend, read textbooks, by hearted if we have to. But
yeah,
cryptocurrency isn't like that.
it isn't like that. There's only like few professors I know, even in entirely the US,
Yeah.
that are really proficient in it. There's,
Very interesting.
I was literally following Twitter because these people are on Twitter,
Right.
and whenever a white paper launches or whenever a new company launches,
Yeah.
we look at them and we study them to see like, hey, what's new happening,
So that in itself, if you have to go to Twitter to get the latest information, that is a new field. There is
Yeah.
very few other fields that can boast of that particular aspect. Okay, so the what I find interesting about this is that uh, we all have to approach different subjects, and we all have to try and get a grasp of things in that subject, and we have to remember them. You will agree that that is common for all of us.
Yeah.
Like we all have that particular challenge. Now, tell me, why is it so difficult? Why do we have to struggle so much? Why do we have to go through so much of a problem just to do this?
It's really baffling because by now you think we've done school, everyone's given some kind of exam to get into college,
Right,
and we're finally in college. But still, I guess whenever you do something new in terms of studies, it's always a struggle to cope with the
correct.
studying material. I
Whenever
think,
it's something new,
yeah, whenever it's something new.
correct. So the that actually hits the nail on the head, because whenever it's something new, your brain is now trying to remember something which is absolutely fresh, that it has no previous context over. So the first time that Jenil tried to read cryptocurrency is very different from all the computer science knowledge that he's had. And when you go from 12th standard to MBBS, and the first time you read about anatomy, and the first time you see a liver cross section, you have no context of it. Like, what do you do with that information? It is completely new. So that struggle of remembering something new is also something I think which is common for all of us, all our fields. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So why is that? Why is remembering such a bitch? Why is remembering so tough?
Um, I don't know. I see. I also saw this one thing that, like in your videos, I
Yeah.
saw so many people comment the same thing, that I feel that it's way more fun to listen to you talk about neuroscience than to actually open a book of neuroscience. So, I mean,
That's
it is there
interesting.
is.
I mean,
Yeah, I
that's
mean, like,
flattering, but it's also interesting.
like you explained the love and the hormones and whatnot, and I remember that. But like something I studied day before yesterday, I don't exactly remember that. I have to
Okay.
revise
What did you study?
proper orthopedics.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, uh, my view on why is it so difficult is that unfortunately we don't have perfect memory. In a nutshell, if you had perfect memory, the kind of memory that you can only dream about, the पढ़ लिया याद रख लिया, सुन लिया याद रह गया, सोच लिया याद रह गया. If you had that, what you call eidetic memory, for example, or what Sheldon claims to have in Big Bang Theory, if you have that, probably we wouldn't need to struggle so much. Is that a valid thing to think?
Yeah.
Probably.
Probably.
Yeah.
Janil?
Yeah. I mean, it's also important. Like a lot of times, you can remember things, but understanding concepts can also be really hard.
Yes.
So, like, let's
Yeah.
say we're
Yes.
technically cyborgs, right? We have our phone, and our phone remembers everything. It calculates it for me, but it's the making those connections and
Brilliant.
understanding it is hard.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So then we are getting into the nitty gritty of memory. So when we talk of learning, anything, it doesn't matter. Learning as a concept, when we talk of learning, what we are actually talking about is memory. Because without memory, there's no learning. Now, tell me, what are the challenges of memory? What is the problem? Memory का problem क्या है? Like human memory. What goes wrong with memory? What do you think?
I think you're distracted the first time you are
Yeah,
trying to learn something.
correct. And
And
And to basically remember something, you need to revise again and again, go through it again and again.
perfect. Now, if you have one of the main problems of memory is that you keep forgetting things. you hear something and it goes away. So things don't stick. The next problem of memory is that you have selectivity. Now, you may have attended a meeting, for example. 6 months later, you may remember some parts of that, not everything. Now, why is that? Why do we remember some things and we forget other things?
Because we value those things, we attach a
Yes.
Yeah.
value to it.
Yes. So that brings us to the next point, that because we have selectivity of memory, not everything sticks in the same amount. And so what you try to remember is as important as who is remembering it. So because it's you and you hold certain things as more valuable, more things will stick to you. And somebody else in the same situation, they will not be able to remember that. That is the second thing. The third thing that I want to talk about on memory is how we form connections. Now, if something is happening in front of you right now, you can put two and two together. But that same thing, if it had happened like 10 years ago, it will be a lot more difficult. Just to give you an example, so Mansi and I think we met over neuroscience now,
Yeah.
but we also met, I think, 10 years ago or
7, 8
something
years
like
ago.
that
Yeah.
at a poetry club meeting.
Yeah.
And that is an absolutely random thing that we met that time. And we may not have remembered it now. And if we didn't remember it, that connection would not have been made. But Jenil and I may have met. We don't know. Because we don't remember, we are not able to form that connection. Maybe 10 years ago, we were in the same library or something. Now, suppose we had perfect memory, suppose we had documented everything, then we could have formed that connection. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then comes the issue of how knowledge keeps changing. So the things that you read 5 years ago is not the things that you read now. The knowledge itself, the truth itself will keep changing. And suppose you've forgotten what was the truth at that time, then you will have no idea how things have changed in the last 5 years. And so every time you see something, you are a little surprised, like, oh, what is this? I don't know where this came from. Whereas if you knew what was there before, you can see how knowledge is evolving. And
Yeah.
if you can see how knowledge is evolving, then you can also predict how things are going to go. So better your memory, better you are able to predict things. So like
Right.
these are all like very random things about memory that when I think of the challenges that we face, if we had perfect memory, these are all the problems we wouldn't have. Everything will just stick. We'll be able to remember everything, not just selective things. According to who you are as a person, you won't pick and choose between things. You'll be able to form connections both in front of you and things that have happened way behind. And you'll be able to see how things are evolving and you can predict how things are going to go. And poor memory means all these things get fucked up. That is like a big price to pay for poor memory. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
memories, it's really important. I mean, if you think about it, there's so many things that I learned I might have forgotten. That,
Yeah.
if I would have remembered, I would have been able to make those connections. And in future, like if something like Neuralink or something
Yeah.
evolved and somehow we are able to remember everything,
Yeah.
then we're basically a supercomputer and we
Exactly.
can make those connections easily.
Exactly.
Like Jenil said, there won't be much difference between our phones and us, between Google and us or something like that.
So what is that? What is that thing you just said? What does that mean when you use your phone to remember a phone number,
Yeah. Yeah.
which 50 years ago people would just remember these 10 digit or 8 digit numbers, landline
Yeah.
numbers, and then suddenly there was a point where none of us remember any number.
Yeah, I think more and more the use of phones now, like I feel like it's made me incapable of retaining numbers for a longer period of time.
So
So,
Nivedita has just said something absolutely correct. It's outsourcing memory.
right.
Yeah.
That is what we are doing. And more we are outsourcing memory. We are outsourcing memory of phone numbers. We are outsourcing memory of faces, of moments. So when we click a photograph, when we click a selfie, we are outsourcing that memory. Otherwise, we were supposed to remember how we looked like, how happy we were. But you don't want to remember anymore. You want to take a selfie. Everything is outsourcing memory.
Yep.
Now think of how it would have started. So think of cavemen, all the way back when cavemen would just figure out something that okay, you can this is how seasons change, for example. Now, how do you remember that? How do you make sure that this gets passed on? This information gets transmitted across to the next generation. They have to
Documentation.
They would,
documentation.
yeah,
Exactly, documentation. Because if you don't document, what do you think will happen?
Well, as one generation or one set of people that have experienced something, they die, the things will die along with
It'll
the
just
memory.
go, and you have to start from scratch, basically. So, like one generation discovers fire, and then they don't tell anyone, and they die off,
It's
then
lost.
it's lost. And
lost.
the next time, maybe that thing will get discovered after maybe 100 years, 500 years. We don't know. So, at the simplest level, documentation. And probably the earliest forms of documentation were cave art, maybe,
Yeah.
then language. So if they didn't have language, how can you document anything? And then books, notes, computers, Google Keep, Google Docs, visual art, movies, films, poetry. Today, Zoom meetings, recorded Zoom meetings. We are here all the way now, and we are still doing that same thing that we've been doing right from Stone Age time. So it's just trying to document things. So now I have all these things to say. You have things to say to in return. So we are having this conversation. Now suppose we were having this conversation in a room and not on YouTube live, right? And suppose this conversation was not going to get recorded. And suppose none of us went out and told this to anyone and we all died. I mean, we will die, but then we died without telling anyone. That's lost. It's gone. It's over.
Yeah.
We may benefit, but it's not going to add up to anything else.
Yeah.
Does that sound fair, or am I missing something?
That's
No,
Yeah.
that's true. It's true.
That makes sense.
So if you put it that way, it doesn't really matter how well you put it out, or how much with how much clarity, as long as you're putting it out there. Document, like just document whatever. Which is why diary writing, journaling, all of those things are just documentation. You're just writing down stuff. Now tell me, what do you think about note making? Mansi,
No.
It's super important, but I'm very bad at it.
tell me about it. Tell me how do you go about it?
Yeah.
What is note making for you?
Okay. So historically, I've always hated making notes because my handwriting sucks. I don't like seeing my own
Okay.
handwriting.
That's
And I've always
unfortunate.
had a problem with that.
Okay.
So I've always been the one to take notes from others, but I'll personalize it and like annotate and make it mine based
Yeah.
on what I remember.
Right.
Another challenge I usually faced was I was lazy to take running notes, and then later on when I had to recollect and make my own notes, it was always difficult.
Right.
But that being said, I like making notes. I just wish I was better at it and my handwriting was
Correct.
better.
Yeah.
So that's why after I joined work and with even with CA, when I used to use a lot of computers and all for studying, I just found it a lot more easy. I could just type things out. Even when I started reading books, like I transitioned from fiction to non-fiction, I always found it helpful to just kind of summarize what I
Note
read.
down. Okay.
Yeah, otherwise I will forget it. I mean, those are some pretty
Exactly.
difficult books to read, and I have taken efforts to understand it.
And did that help?
It did. Like, it helped in small ways, like when I had interviews to give, and I claim to have read books, I would just read that summary so I can talk about it in an interview. And of course, it helps. It
Fair
like
enough.
comes back to me. Yeah.
Fair enough. And the fact that you've sort of understood that, okay, this is what how much you can remember and this is how much you can't. And
Yeah.
if you writing down that thing increases that memory, so to speak, then that means that your memory has increased for all
Yeah.
practical purposes.
And I mean, I don't know how, but I have been blessed with a good memory, so I'm pretty happy about that.
Excellent.
And so I've never really consciously thought about remembering things. It has come naturally to me, even with studies and all. It has just flowed. I am not sure how or how I approached it, but it has always gone smooth
That
with
is a blessing.
all
Is
of
there
this.
wood around you? Just touch it.
Yeah.
I did. I already did.
Kalpesh, thanks. So there are people in the chat who are being very, very, very kind and supportive to this whole experiment that we are doing, where we are trying to discuss these really complex subjects and trying to make it fun, and it makes it all really worthwhile. Coming to what you just said, there was one point, one line that you said, Mansi, I really liked. You said in at one point you said, I don't like taking notes, and at another point you said, I like making notes. And
Yeah.
I just want to put it, like, bring that little nugget out and just put it in front of everybody and tell me, do you think there is a difference between those two things, between taking notes and making notes?
I mean, I subconsciously said it, but when I talk
What do you
about
think is the difference? Jenil,
when
what do you
I
think?
I'm not really sure, but I was gonna say that I usually take notes after,
Yeah.
because whenever a class is going on, I like to pay attention to it. Otherwise, I don't know if I can multitask,
Correct.
but I usually wait for the class to end and then I go home and take notes, and then I make notes, and
Yeah.
I can save it for the exam or something. So
Correct.
that's how I understand it. So
Yeah. So even Mansi, were you going to say something?
yeah, so I may have subconsciously said it, but I think it's similar to what Jenil said. During the class, I just like to pay attention. I like to fully understand it. And by taking, it means I'm taking notes using someone else's thought process, depends on what someone is saying. But when I make notes, it's in a way to
Your own.
it's my own, yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. So even that, so from where I come from, I feel the same way. I feel that taking notes is you're taking down notes. You're just
Yeah.
trying to document things that are happening as and then. So either a stream of consciousness or a lecture or a video, YouTube video, anything. And for me, the minute you say make, I think we are in the zone of creativity. I think you are creating something. And maybe not everybody sees it this way, but for me, I think notes are works of art. I always see it like that. So once on Twitter, I just asked randomly, share your notes, and people shared the most unbelievably beautiful notes. And they were digital, they were on paper. It doesn't matter, but the way people have made notes, it's nothing lesser than art. The way they have highlighted, the way they've drawn diagrams, where they've made labels. People had actually made legends, next to it, that this color means this, this, and the kind of effort that people put into making notes. That sort of got me to thinking that how when you take notes, you're just taking in all the information. You're just documenting stuff. But when you sit to make notes, you are doing something different. It's different from just copying down something somebody is saying,
Yeah. And you remember it longer.
and you remember it longer. Why is that? What is different when you make notes? What do you think? All of you, anyone?
Well, you try and understand the topic and then write it down using your own perspective, I guess. You know how you understood that thing today and
Right,
in your
right.
own language, kind of.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
it's
Yeah.
like our own language. That sometimes I will write things in notes that nobody has mentioned, but I thought about it.
Correct.
And it helps me remember and go back to that moment and just
Exactly.
remember everything else.
So it's just
Yeah.
like your own context, your own
Yeah.
what clicked in your brain when you read that or heard that or whatever.
Right.
Amazing. General, is there anything you would?
Yeah, exactly. So I was thinking, like, when when someone asks you, hey, what do you do? And then they explain what they do in their own way. But usually, whenever you ask someone, sometimes they will repeat it. Like, let's say I'm listening, I'll repeat it. Oh, this is what you do. So I summarize it in a way that I can remember it,
Right.
so that I
Correct.
can store it in my head. And
Right.
that's exactly what's happening with notes. I read something and then I summarize in it in a way and then write it down so that I can remember it. And then I omit the parts, whatever I think that, oh, I can just remember this, or
Yeah.
oh, I don't think
Yeah.
this is too important,
Hmm.
whereas it may be important to someone else.
Hmm.
So
Absolutely.
I learned a lot
So
from that. That's why it's storing it in a way.
correct. So that is
Yeah.
absolutely the way that even I look at it. That when I first see a concept, it is completely new to me. So I don't even try and break it down. Like I just put it down on paper, and the making notes part comes after that. So when you attach your own context, because this is the thing with learning, when you hear a fact, when you hear a new fact, something that you've never heard of before, uh, for example, human body has 206 bones, for example, which is a fact. Now, you've never heard of this. I mean, Tanya has heard of it, but you guys have not heard of this particular fact. And if I ask you to remember it, and if I ask you to remember it for the next 5 years, for example, that I'll come back in 2025 and ask you how many bones does the human body have. Now, there are a couple of ways you can remember this. You can either repeat it 100 times, just go on looping, say it again and again and again until as soon as I say human body, you will automatically say 206 bones, which means you are making a phonological connection. So because you've kept saying those words in the same pattern, the pattern of the words now link to each other. Or you could link this fact to some closest fact that you already know about the human body. So maybe you had broken a bone at some point. Maybe you had a fracture and you knew one particular bone name. You could link up this fact to that fact. And that is another way that people remember things. How would you remember it? Is there a trick that you use? Suppose if I tell you that you have to remember this fact for 5 years, how would you go about it? You just
I
write
think
it. You just write it down.
mnemonics. So they use mnemonics. People make mnemonics to remember better.
Yeah.
Yeah, that never works for me.
That never
How
works.
how do you
Same.
remember a fact though? I mean, mnemonic would be a
Oh, a
list,
fact.
right? Like
Yeah.
206 bones in a body. How would you remember it?
I think I just repeat it again and again.
Yeah.
That's it.
So
Yeah.
repetition
Ratta
is
kind of.
ratta.
Ratta kind of.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
doctors. Yeah, that's what. No.
I remember back in 11th and 10th and 12th, we used to have chemistry tuitions, and
Yeah.
we had to memorize the whole periodic table. And
All of them. The whole element chart.
yeah, all
Wow.
of them.
Okay.
And so what we used to do is when the chemistry exam was there, on the back we had like a rough page, and there we used to draw the entire periodic table. So whenever we had to make equations with reactants and products, we used to be able to do it. So our professor made a song about it, and
Oh,
based on the
excellent.
lyrics of the song,
Yeah.
you could remember the entire periodic table.
Amazing.
And for the longest time, I used to show everyone that, hey, I can remember the entire periodic table, and that's how I remember it. I don't remember it right now,
Yeah.
but that was one technique
That is amazing. So
that we remembered things.
there are so many corollaries to what you just said, because for the longest time, before writing was invented, all knowledge was in songs, all knowledge was in poems. So all your old texts, all your religious texts, everything, if you notice, they're all in verses. They're not paragraphs. They're not huge essays. They're all in couplets. And the reason for that is because it is one of the brain tricks.
Rhythm.
Rhythm. Rhythm and rhyme. As soon as you put rhythm and rhyme and tune into it, your brain just remembers it so much faster, which is why you can remember entire song lyrics, but you can't remember 2 lines in your CA textbook. It's just because it's so much harder. And the reason is that you are forming more loops. Now, what does that mean? What when I say that you're forming more loops? Does that ring a bell? Does that make sense to you instinctively?
I guess like the song, the lyrics are repeating kind of.
Yeah.
You've got a beat to associate that thing with. That's
Yeah.
why I guess like you remember lyrics
Right.
because I guess everyone has this problem of remembering lyrics better than they remember their own studies and like.
Yeah.
Uh,
So one is that when you're reading, you have a visual loop. So the light rays go in, it goes into your brain, you register the words, and that's it. That is one single visual loop. One way to remember is to read it 100 times. So that visual loop keeps getting repeated, repeated, repeated. The minute you say it aloud, so some people read out loud when they study and they find it helpful. What you're doing is you're adding a second loop. So now you're not only seeing it, but you're also hearing it. And so you're adding another loop. So now there are 2 loops going around. And the more number of loops, the better your memory. Essentially, when you get a fact, the more number of loops you put that fact through, the more it sticks. So you add a third loop that if you don't remember this, you are going to fail. Now there is an emotional loop that I have to remember this because otherwise there will be bad consequences. And that is a very strong loop. So the reason that most students study in today's schools, the traditional way of learning, is because that fear loop is going around. If you don't study, you'll fail. If you don't study, you'll get a beating or whatever. Now that's the third loop. What happens if you see something and you write it?
Well, you would be involving you would be putting in a fourth loop, I guess,
Yeah,
because you'd be involving the muscles and the part of the brain
correct.
involved in all of
So
that.
you're reading it, seeing the shapes,
Right.
telling the part of your brain that controls your muscles, and then you're writing it. So that is a whole other loop. If you're writing it and saying it out loud, there's another loop. What if you have to make notes instead of taking notes? So as Jenil described it, what happens then? How many loops get added then? You've heard a lecture, you've taken notes, you've written down a bunch of stuff. Then you go home and then you're making notes. So how many loops get added then? Just try to think of all the things your brain has to do in order to make notes.
So
Mansi?
you're constantly
Yeah.
looking for connections. So if I'm reading something and if I'm making notes, I'm going to relate it to something and I'm going to think about other things that may be related to it, so I can understand it and make those connections. So you're constantly, analyzing it and then attaching a value to it. So it's a whole new loop
Brilliant.
added.
Brilliant. That's exactly what happens. That the more connections you create, each connection is a loop. And so if you talk about human body and bones and 206, maybe you have one loop for human body. Maybe you have one loop for 206, the number. Maybe the 206 is the last number of your phone. Maybe 206 is your flat number. It doesn't matter. Any extra loop you create in your brain helps you remember more.
Interesting.
To put it in the simplest way possible.
That's why passwords are usually all these kind of numbers which you expect to remember. Your flat number and your car number
Correct.
and your birthdays, and because you expect to remember it, but then you
Yes.
forget it anyway.
Yes. So each one of those things is an extra loop, and when you
Yeah.
create them, it's actually like a memory hack. And all these things wouldn't apply if only you had perfect memory. If you had perfect memory, we wouldn't be having this discussion. But because human beings do not have perfect memory, we have to do all these different hacks to try and remember things better. Now, in note taking, when you are taking down notes, you are involving a fixed number of loops. But when you're making notes, you are involving all the loops that are involved in creativity. So you are bringing out your own, as we say, if you have a PFC, use it. It is exactly like that. So now you are not just hearing and letting it go. You are thinking about it. You're analyzing. You're bringing your own personality into it. And with every extra loop, it sticks more and more. I don't know if you've heard of Richard Feynman.
I have.
Yes. Amazing physicist, amazing teacher.
Absolutely.
He had this thing of, if you want to learn, teach. Like that was his, like one of his main things, that if you want to learn, teach. And even if you're teaching yourself, if you have nobody else to teach, even if you're teaching yourself, as soon as you get into that frame of mind where you are now a teacher, you're not a student, then suddenly the way you look at the subject changes. Now you're no longer just backbencher sitting, acha theek hai, chal raha hai, aane do, information. Now suddenly you are at a position where you have to take that information, break it down, attach metaphors, think of examples, कि अच्छा इसके imagine this, imagine that, and you're trying to think of corollaries. And what you're actually doing is, every time you think of an example, you are adding another loop. Every time you think of a metaphor, you're adding another loop. Until it's just so many loops, and then suddenly you know it. And we don't know what time it is that something goes from a fact that you have to remember to something you just know. But at some point, when you're adding those loops, at some point, maybe between the third and the seventh loop, you just know it. And then you don't have to try and remember it anymore, because now it is so connected to all these different things that it's just a part of you. And yeah, Tanya.
No, I was thinking, I guess that's why even like suppose as a student also we teach our friends or someone. I guess we are accountable for them understanding that particular thing.
Yeah.
So we like put in extra effort,
Yeah.
like when you're the recipient, you're just listening and accepting.
Correct.
Yeah. So you won't use as much of a brain as you would if you are responsible for making someone else.
Exactly, because to put it in the neuroscience way, your prefrontal cortex, your PFC, is not really being put to use when you're listening.
Yeah.
Because the part of your brain that listens is all piche. You need to hear something and understand it. Not even understand it, just understand the words. Understand ki, acha, this word means this. You don't even have to put it together, actually. You can just keep nodding. And the minute you have to say it back, so that is why teachers ask questions from students, because the minute you have to say it back, that saying it back comes from your prefrontal cortex. So you are involving a whole other part of your brain just to make the students return something. And if you ask them to teach you, then it is all PFC. Then your hearing goes out, everything goes out. Then it is only PFC. And the more PFC you use, the more connections you form, essentially. Okay. How do you make notes? Any one of you. Mansi, how do you make notes?
I take a book, take a pen. So, I mean, I try to reduce the number of words. I try to make flowcharts. I mean, that's
Okay.
my go-to kind of notes.
Okay.
So that, yeah, I just remember things better that way. Or lists, points, lists.
Okay. You're a flowcharter and lister. Okay.
Yeah.
And that works. So now you are comfortable with that whole scheme.
Yeah. I mean, I cannot have pages because it helps me visually remember it too.
Exactly.
And not just the words. I
Exactly.
remember how it looks on the page.
Exactly. Jenil, do you have a system to make notes?
Yeah. So when I was in school, I used to just take notes on pen and paper. I used to have like this thing for pens.
Yeah.
So I used to have different
Yeah.
like ink pen,
All of
and
us. Yeah.
I used to enjoy writing that.
Yeah.
So I used to take just normal notes. I used to make those charts and take notes. But when I started doing coding, all our exams, over 50% of the exams were not writing code on the computer, but writing it on pen and paper.
Oh,
Somehow the
really?
professors thought that this was better. This is where you actually test a programmer, and this is how
Wow.
like, because when you do it on the computer, there's autofill, there's different ways where you can trigger a connection
Circumvent.
and then
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So you get to the answer really easily, but when you're like proposed a question,
Hmm.
and you have to think creatively, and when there is no computer in front of you, how do you form the logic of it?
Wow.
So taking notes became a little different when I started coding,
Right.
and it was a lot of solving other problems and trying to
Hmm. His voice is
and
just
all
broken,
that stuff.
right?
And I knew people who used to
Yeah.
do like
Janil, your voice was breaking for a bit. Can you repeat what you just said? That code
yeah.
after
So
coding things became different.
yeah, so I started writing code on paper, and then we had to write something called as a pseudocode, which was the
Okay.
logic of the answer.
Okay.
So you read the problem, you analyze it, and then come up with a solution, and then which was called as the pseudocode. It doesn't have to obey the laws of code, but it has to logically make sense.
Okay.
So we used to make
Is that
bullet
also pen
points.
and paper? Okay.
It's pen and paper, it's different colors, it's
Right.
writing code syntax and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was the way of making notes, and then we used to just refer back to it, make bullet points, and just like
Yeah.
write words that you can remember, and
So
then
this is also
yeah.
interesting that it changes with the field. So I mean, Tanya, when you make notes, do you make notes?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
when you make notes, it would, I assume that it would be a lot more diagrams.
Oh yes, diagrams and like she said, like Mansi said, flowcharts,
Yeah.
and basically a lot of pictorial representation
Correct.
and like bullet points and just like the keywords and all would be highlighted. I
Correct.
prefer all of that.
Correct. So I mean, that's it's the same for me because I think in medicine everything is extremely visual. So the when you talk right from day one anatomy, though it's everything is visual, but even the others, so biochemistry, physiology. So when you visualize the atomic bonds between chemicals, when you think of heart beating, when you try to think of how neurons connect to each other, neuroanatomy, the brain structure, everything is so visual. And one thing I understood was how you can compress one page worth of text into one diagram.
Yeah, that's so true. And it also looks tiny, so it's
Yes,
not that daunting. You're doing more of the
exactly,
content, but it is compressed, so it feels better in even doing
exactly.
it.
And just what you just felt is what your brain also feels. Because, I mean, you are your brain, but even when you're trying to learn, when you are faced with 1000 words and they're all new, they are actually 1000 units of information that your brain has to put together, as opposed to one diagram will have, say, 3 units of information that you have to put together, like 3 colors, for example. And in that way, your brain is actually pretty silly because even though you're saying the same thing in a diagram, your brain is like, this is this, I can handle this. I
Yeah,
get
this
this.
is
Like, this
easy.
is this one graph and this is the information, and I totally get it. Same thing, same diagram, you try and explain it in a paragraph, and your brain's like, नहीं ये बहुत ज़्यादा है हमसे ना हो पाएगा हम लोग नहीं कर रहे and it's not that you can't do it, but the effort in understanding it is more, and you will come to that same place because ultimately it's just a matter of understanding. So whether it is through diagram or whether it's through text or whether it is through somebody telling you or whether it's through a podcast, ultimately you just have to connect the dots. But that effort that you have to put into connecting the dots is so much easier through visual. Is something that I feel. Now that's just something that I have experienced. Yes, Jenil.
So it was interesting that you were just talking about diagrams. So when we were preparing for interviews and when we were taught CS, a lot of it was also diagrams.
Yeah.
So we had to deal with a lot of data structures like trees, graphs, and just draw them out. So I used to be a tutor also.
Oh
So
wow.
whenever I had to explain it to someone,
Hmm.
we used to do it in diagrams. So if I had to explain like an array of items, we used to think of examples and draw a diagram, and then make sure that you understand the diagram. Only then we go to the code.
Brilliant.
So yeah, the visual representation also
Yeah.
helps.
So that you've just added so many loops. So you've thought of examples. So that's a whole set of loops there. And then you convert it into diagrams, which is a whole set of loops there. So by the time you've done teaching one class, you have become a master of that subject. Even if your students
Yeah,
haven't, you have, because and that is why they say, right, like, do not hesitate in teaching anyone anything. It will benefit the teacher like 100 times more than the student. And there is this whole concept, right, like, oh, I learned it after so much difficulty, why should I give it easily, and that whole thing, which is there in a lot of traditional learning scenarios. And while I sympathize, because they had to suffer to learn it from their seniors, so it's like this chain reaction. But when you think of the kind of benefit that teaching gives you, I think it outweighs all the negative things. Like, there's no
100%.
comparison.
It's like the more you give, the more you get. It's kind of like that with
Yeah.
Exactly.
teaching.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
it's also kind of like investments, right? And when you are, it's like you're investing knowledge, and as you're investing it, your own concepts become so clear that the next level of knowledge becomes that much easier to understand. So it's always the most difficult initially, when you know none of the words. And as you form more and more and more connections, the next piece of information just fits in, like there is hardly any time. So now when I read a neuroscience paper versus 4 years ago when I would have read that paper, it's completely different. Like, the time it takes for me to read it now is like half an hour for a completely new paper, and it would have taken me like 4 to 5 hours before, and I wouldn't have understood it. To give you another example, there is a textbook called Harrison. Okay, so it's like the Bible of medicine, and everybody reads it, whether they should or not. Everybody reads it. So people start reading it from like second year MBBS, because it looks very cool to walk around with a Harrison in your hand, because you get that nerd vibe, right? Like, you feel like, oh my god, like people's part ways and all, like, अरे इसके हाथ में Harrison है, हटो हटो. And it's that whole feel. But when you read it in second year MBBS versus final year MBBS, the same chapter, and you read it in MD medicine, and then you read it in DM, and then you read it when you're practicing in your own hospital, that same chapter, that same paragraph hits you differently. Like, you make a different sense out of it, and you can't believe that you've read this before, because this is completely new. This is no, and you may have underlined it also. You'll see that you've made words written next to it and all that, but it doesn't matter. It's like reading something new, which is mind blowing, how the same knowledge can change because you have changed.
You have
Yeah,
more knowledge to
Yes, to
understand it.
understand it, which is another reason why I don't think teaching anybody, you lose anything by it, because they will only understand at their level. So all the benefit is for you
Yeah.
in sharing information. Like, you have nothing to lose when you teach.
So
That's
like I
why when
had
people, sorry.
Yeah.
no, that's cool. Go ahead.
That's why when people ask doubts or something, and if you can solve it for them, it's brilliant. You will remember that forever. And
Exactly. And
yeah,
you have somebody's gratitude, which is like win-win.
yeah.
Like, there's
And confidence that you know it.
yes, absolutely. And even if you don't, which is my point, even if you don't know it fully, there is also this thing of, if you do,
Problem solving.
if you don't know
Has
fully, then don't teach. Aisa, like, it's a wrong thing, right?
You can never know fully
You can
anything
never know
fully.
fully. Exactly. Because knowledge is infinite. You can never know anything fully, and whatever you teach, whatever you say, there will always be a line beyond which you don't know. And there is always that chance that you may say something wrong. And if you don't teach because you're afraid of that line, or you're afraid that, oh my god, what if I say something wrong and somebody points it out, you're not going to be able to teach. Right? And these classes, like the last 2 months, that is what I have realized, that I had a fear of that when I'm saying these things, I keep reading up, I keep making sure that okay, what I'm saying is factually correct, and I have references and all that. But at some point you need to let go of that fear and be okay with being wrong. Like, it's fine if somebody points out something that, oh, you said this in this one video and this is wrong. It's very weird to take knowledge personally. Like, I didn't you are also trying to learn, somebody else is also trying to learn, and and you also benefit from someone telling you something. Anyway,
True,
I think this
true.
is sort of on a tangent, but yeah. um, how neat are you guys when you make notes?
Not at all.
Oh no, not at
Uh,
all, really?
no. I mean, I try to be as neat as possible, but it's just that I fit the stereotype that doctors have shitty handwriting. And I really have shitty handwriting. But I cannot do without my notes, so I have to.
You have to.
I mean, I don't like other people's notes. I feel like it defeats them.
Right.
I, I feel like mine are the best for me at least. So, but actually handwriting, and I use color pencil and whatnot to make
Yeah,
it slightly
to
better.
make it cleaner. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of people in the chat saying that they would like to be in this discussion at some point, which is like, kudos to you guys. Like, you've made it interesting enough. Thank you. That is pretty
Yay.
awesome.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you for having us also. It's really awesome.
Yes.
So coming back to neatness, what about you guys? Mansi, Jenil, are you guys neat freaks when it comes to notes?
Not at all.
So
But actually, especially if I'm just taking running notes or writing things, my brain is just going so fast, my hand cannot keep up. So that's why I'm
Wow.
not neat.
Right. But that is when you're
That's,
taking notes. Or is it
yeah,
making notes?
or even writing like exam papers and things like that. And I was always bothered by it. And then I just grew over it and I was like, okay, my answers are right. It doesn't matter at
Deal with
all.
it. Yeah.
Like, yeah, you can understand it. I can understand it. We are good.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
But I mean to say, it makes logical sense to me. So I guess my notes are okay. Even if they're not neat,
Exactly.
they're making sense to me.
Correct. So neatness in oh wait, channel just okay. I think his
I
internet
think he
was
froze. Yeah, I think
yeah.
he froze before.
Probably
Yeah.
he'll come back. Yeah. So neatness in terms of how you are writing on paper, and neatness in terms of logic are two separate things.
Yeah.
Right? Does that make sense? That hi channel,
Yeah.
welcome back.
hi, sorry.
No problem. But yeah, like I think that people equate one with the other, but out of the two, if you had to choose, then neatness of logic is much more important.
Exactly.
Even if your handwriting is bad, your concepts should be clear. Like, a concept should be spaced out and properly colored and arranged and all that. And your handwriting may be crap, but as long as you get it, it's fine. There are people whose handwriting is very good and their concepts aren't good, and that is a problem. General, yeah.
Yeah, so I when you in the beginning you said that writing is art,
It's
and
again,
I
yeah.
really believe
Yeah.
it's art because
Uh, General, your your voice was hanging up again. Can you repeat that, please?
is it okay now?
No, it's still hanging up a little bit.
Is it okay?
Okay, so we'll one second. We'll give it a minute. We'll wait for your net to just settle down a little. Uh,
Okay, let me exit WhatsApp. I think it's because of that.
Probably.
Mhm. Yeah,
So
it's better now, I think.
so uh, so this is the last part of the stream basically. Like, I just wanted to have like a couple of points on how to structure your notes, because I think that's something that we should just talk about. One is neatness. So, like we covered, like neatness of logic versus neatness of writing. One is skeleton. How do you, in on paper, do you have a thought that, okay, so this is how my the shape of the notes. Do you have that thought of how your notes should look like? Not your handwriting per se, but the skeleton, like the skeleton on the page.
Yeah, kind of. Like, I think everyone's got that, you have a heading and then you underline it and then you want sub points
Yeah,
and then diagrams. Everyone has this preferred side for diagrams or something.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
like you have an outline.
Basically, you plan your notes. Like I at
Yeah,
least plan my notes.
How?
yeah,
How
like
it's
your mini
yeah.
book, your own book, kind of.
Yeah, so it's like you're
Yeah.
yeah, you're basically creating your own book, and you
Yeah.
want to know how it works. So I was, because of this stream, I was actually reading up on the different kinds of note taking, and there are a lot of different types. So there are names for different kinds. So Morse code notes, there is outline notes, there is something called as charting method, there's something called as mind mapping method. Like they have just
Yeah.
named different ways of how to structure your thoughts, and it's very interesting how you can follow one of them and let's just take it as a precondition, or you can sort of invent your own. And I'm a big fan of inventing your own notes, like your own style, because I think everybody's mind works a little differently. But I was interested in knowing, if have you guys sort of figured out your own method, or is it just go with the flow?
I think it changes topic to topic. It just something comes in your head and you put it
Correct.
on paper.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that is fair, because even for me, if the subject is something that can be tabulated, for example, like pros and cons of something, then it is something that is very easily made into a table. But if there are extremely complex things, then I always go for a flowchart. Like I hate running text. I hate, because I always like that arrow, and then going everywhere. Yeah. So for me, it just gives me a kind of like a structure, to the point where I even draw flowcharts for social stuff, like how relationships work, and just because,
And
yeah,
we are thankful for that.
Yeah.
yeah, I'm sure. But
We've seen the latest Instagram and videos.
but just like I find it so much easier to visualize it, as opposed to writing a blog post, for example. Like that same thing can be a blog post, but I just find it so much easier to visualize it in a flowchart.
And it catches more attention. Like a lot more people would pay more attention to your posts if they're a graph or
Correct.
pictures.
Yeah.
And so and the reason is what we spoke about before, right? The brain
Yeah.
finds it easier.
Yeah.
So the
Making more
more,
notes.
yeah, like it's just one unit, and the more you trouble people, the less they like it. So if you make them read an entire blog post, they'll be very annoyed. Like they're like, I don't want to put in so much effort. And you give it to them in a nice, sweet little, JPEG file, and they're like, oh wow, this is so cool. That is exactly how memory works. Yeah, Jen, welcome back.
Yeah, sorry about the internet connection.
Not a
It's
problem. Not a problem.
unexpected.
Okay, so
This kind of, sorry.
But yeah, I had a question about memory.
yeah,
How do nootropics, or like say let's say coffee or something like that,
yeah.
affect making connections and all that?
So cough. Okay, so like specifically, all these medications, coffee, they have a lot to do with your underlying attention,
Okay.
right? So I mean, it's not a very straightforward answer, because there is a lot of connections with your sleep. There is a lot of connection with your uh, ability to focus. So okay, so attention is a whole other concept, right? So
Okay.
we think
Okay.
we know what attention means, but neuroscientifically speaking, attention is like this whole mind-blowing thing that has so much of relevance to learning, memory, spirituality, consciousness, everything. Like everything is attention. And so because of that, your entire brain networks are involved in attention. And what
I
these
see.
things do, like coffee and all other things, like even having a good night's sleep, music, all these things, they play with your attention, like either
Okay.
removing attention, directing attention, ability to focus attention on one thing, that whole thing. We can talk about attention in a separate video. I think that'll be.
We need to.
Yes.
Just
I can see that you're curious now. We will. Uh, the last thing I wanted to say was, oh, hang on, Divij, thank you so much. So there is this whole thing of super chat, which I noticed at in Tanmay streams, and now it started in mine, and I'm feeling really like it's like this whole other thing, man. Like it's very distracting, and it's also really nice to see. But okay, hang on, 1 second. I'm gonna just talk a little bit about some chat questions, because some of them are really interesting. Um, make more videos on how to learn efficiently. Yeah, so I could do that. So when I was reading these, preparing for this chapter, for this discussion, there are a lot of memory hacks and learning hacks that like I came up with and I read about, but I didn't want to cover this here because this was more of a let's understand the concept of note taking kind of a lecture. But if you guys enjoyed this, and if people enjoyed this, and we can actually do one on memory hacks, like how to learn better. That could be
That
one.
would be, yeah, that would be super fun.
Yeah, you think so?
yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
Awesome. Ask Siddha to make a video on medical marijuana. Marijuana is so popular.
At this point, I feel everyone's just looking for a justification to do it.
I
It's like,
know.
oh, medically, it's very nice.
I know. And what will happen is that afterwards, that video will get shared, and people will be like
Yeah.
telling their parents, like, "See, neuroscientist is saying it's."
No, then it will be going up to your parents. Dr. Siddharth said it's okay
I
to have medical
swear. I
marijuana.
swear. I have to first get a legal opinion before I do that. So, do you have a plan to do a session on nootropics? Advocate for cycling modafinil. Interesting. So again, modafinil has a lot to do with your sleep cycle. So, like I said, it is connected to that, but we can do it for sure. I don't feel Vaibhav is saying I don't feel confident when I revise my notes. I feel that I had some basics in my mind which I didn't get on paper. So then this is probably the difference between taking and making notes, right? So if you had, when you read something, I think that first half an hour is when everything is really fresh in your mind. So probably when you make it then, like if you just put in some time and you make it then, probably you'll be thankful for the rest of your life as long as that topic is needed, because you will never get that clarity again. And one thing I've noticed is how much time and effort we waste in reading the same chapters again and again. Like if you read it once and you underline it, after 8 months when you read it, you almost have to spend the same amount of time. I don't know, like if maybe it's just me, like everybody's just looking
No,
at
it's
me.
happened with me. No, it's happened with me as well. It's happened with me as well. It feels like why I have underlined this, but it feels like it's the first time I'm looking
Exactly,
at this
exactly. And
Yeah.
you think that maybe some of your friends have read this and I didn't read it because
page.
I
Yeah.
don't remember underlining it also. And it
Then
happens
10 minutes go by wondering what have I done.
exactly. So probably note taking would have helped there because
There,
Yeah.
yeah.
so there was this some Japanese app or Japanese note-taking philosophy where you write down something, you take notes, and then you remember something, and then you document that you remembered, let's say, neuroscience of learning this
Mm,
day,
mm.
and then you put it in that app that on this particular date you
Ah,
documented this and you took notes.
yeah.
Then that app will remind you in, like, let's say 6 months or 7 months,
That you
based on
learned
this,
this.
that you learned this that day, and then you should relearn it because you might have forgotten it by now.
Oh.
Brilliant,
That's interesting.
brilliant. Yeah,
What's the
yeah,
name of the app? Even I'm
I,
interested.
I'll put it in the chat
yeah,
in the
yeah.
group, and then
Cool,
but
cool,
yeah, one
cool.
of my friends showed me this and he was like, don't tell anyone, but
Oh my
this
God. Isn't
this
that the
is how
exact
it,
opposite of what you were
Yeah.
What we
saying?
discussed.
Tell
yeah,
everyone.
but teach everyone should teach.
Everyone
So
should teach,
Yeah.
not share
Your
Yeah.
apps.
your friend is gonna message you. You just announce it on a stream.
it helps everyone.
Yeah, it does. It does. So these are all just, this is the same concept. So one of my friends in MBBS told me how he had this system of everything that he would read, he would have to read it after 7 days. Like, so,
Yeah.
so you make a note of something, whatever, all the things you've read, and then you, 7 days later, you keep aside 2 hours for reading everything you've read today. Now that is a different system. There is obviously not nothing like one correct system. It's just whatever works for you. But it's very interesting how people come up with these things
Yeah.
themselves. Like we are all Japanese in some way. Like we all have that thing inside.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, our professors also said the same thing. Revise it 1 day later, then 1 week, then increase it to 1 month.
Yeah.
Like you keep
Correct.
increasing the
Keep increasing.
duration.
Yeah, because the
There's
second
all.
reading is the most important.
There's also this thing like so suppose like when you prepare for NEET PG you do like question banks and everything and
Yeah.
for any exam, so they say that you should not do it the day you studied the particular topic, you should do it like four or
Later.
5 days after. Yeah.
Correct. So
Yeah.
when I was preparing for my NEET PG, I realized one thing, that the first reading is a formality. Like you read it just to get it out of the way so that your second reading starts quickly, because that is when things actually start coming together. And if you spend too much time in your first reading and you don't get time for a second reading, it is like it's not useful, it's a waste. Which again, because if we had perfect memory, that wouldn't be a problem, but we don't.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So how is the, if you look at it in terms of neuroscience of like cognition and intelligence,
Yeah.
how is that linked to like IQ and memory and making those connections, and how do you segregate someone who can like, read it the first time and then they can remember it, whereas someone would have to do it for like 10 hours?
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Like
a
how can one brain be super healthy and,
correct.
or
So
is it not that?
it is. It's a complex thing, because we are not taking the same brain. We are taking a brain of somebody, say, who is 25 years old, and you take five people who are 25 years old, and their brain networks may be very different based on their experiences, their, like you said, right, the value you place on something. So that is why there is this whole thing of emotional memory and artistic memory and academic memory. And so some people will remember entire flowcharts in a second, but they have no idea what somebody else is feeling. So like emotional intelligence, for example. Now, so there's the ability to, like, different people will have different, like some people don't forget a name. It's just the way that their brain is structured, the kind of importance that they give to different things helps them stick, helps those information pieces stick. Now it's all,
Got it.
yeah, but these are all connected though. So the neuroscience of memory is very connected to neuroscience of cognition, and very connected to neuroscience of learning and attention, and they're all just like, it's like a swimming pool. Like we're just trying to divide water. Like they're all flowing into each other. Like it's all a part of the same.
It's all connected.
It's all connected, absolutely. And okay, excellent. So that sort of brings me to the last line that I wanted to say. I don't know if you guys heard the previous learning to learning discussion,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
so
I have.
yeah, so usme there was this one concept that I tried to introduce about how knowledge is arbitrary.
Yeah.
So basically, we are all surrounded by just things are just happening, and there is no inherent difference between two fields. It's just that we have divided it for the sake of our understanding. And for me, what has been happening is that breakup is just continuing, because that's how we learn. So initially things are black and white. So you make one line and things are black and white. So usually when people say things are binary, what they mean is that they've only drawn one line. But then the more you learn about it, the more lines you draw. So then the so-called gray area. So things are not black and white, so things are gray. But things are not actually gray. Things are just, there are different colors, so spectrum,
Right.
right? And uh, nothing is like this whole concept is best encapsulated in medicine, because that's what I went through. Because like in MBBS, you learn a subject, you learn, say, lower leg weakness, like that's a concept. And in MD, that whole concept gets split into, is it a muscle problem, is it a nerve problem, is it a bone problem? And in DM, that nerve problems get split into like 100 things. Like there are 100 different nerve problems that can be there, right? And they're all true. Like at every level, it's still true, but then the quality of that truth keeps changing, keeps getting more and more specific. So for me, uh, when you look at it as a spectrum, you have complete understanding on one side and complete chaos on the other side. And we are sort of going from chaos to understanding. And uh, for me, I think that is why documentation is so important, because there is a real risk of things going back into chaos if you are not documenting things. Because uh, we came from there. We know what that is like when you don't know anything, and we reached till here because we were documenting. Like, so for example, suppose Einstein did not write down his equations, nothing that came after that would have happened. So just like, circling back to the start of the lecture, and like why it is kind of important, I just wanted to reiterate that the whole point of documentation is to go from chaos to knowledge. And it is not just for our lives, like it's not just for clearing NEET or clearing CA, or getting a better job for us. Like that is one thing, but if you're doing your job properly and you're documenting things properly, you don't really know till where it can go. Like, 50 years later, somebody would read Jenil's notes and be like, oh, cryptocurrency se ye bhi kar sakte hain. And that would kickstart a whole new field. You don't know. So just as a random hope, I just wanted to leave it out there, that document.
Actually, cryptocurrency was derived from this one guy who scribbled on his notes, and
Oh, excellent. That proves my
based on
point.
that research paper, payments was evolved.
Amazing.
So
Amazing.
Jenil just gave you the perfect ending.
Yes. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, guys. I think that's about one second. So there are a couple of questions. Is learning language different? Snowball? No. So learning language is the same thing as learning anything else. You have chaos, and then you form patterns. So you attach certain words, certain sounds to certain meanings, and then you use that to build upon itself. So language was like the first original note taking, kind of. Uh, Kaysar has asked how to remember complex things like algorithms, and how to not get disappointed when you don't remember things while reading, while revising. How to not get disappointed, Kaysar, is a different thing. I mean, so disappointment comes when you are expecting something to happen very, very strongly. You're so sure that this will happen, and when it doesn't happen, you get disappointed. But the irony is that disappointment comes in the way of you remembering. So ideally, I think you should just sort of step back and go to the level where you last were able to function properly, and then build up from there again. That is my view. Mm, okay, so last couple of questions. How do neurons, neurotransmitters, and electric impulses convert physical entities into knowledge and memory? Siddhant Sharma, that's a great question. The truth is that we still don't know everything about it. So what we know is that there is an area called hippocampus in the brain, and in the hippocampus, new proteins and new connections are formed. And the hippocampus is kind of like a loop, and the loop is inside a bigger loop called the limbic system, and that is inside a bigger loop called the brain. So it's basically just loops inside loops, and the more things go through that, the more connections are formed and the more proteins get coded, but we still don't know exactly how it happens. Last question, a session on emotional intelligence. Okay, done. We will. Emotional intelligence. We'll do that. Guys, thank you so much. This was a completely new experiment for me, but you guys made it really easy for me. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
I hope you enjoyed it as well.
Yes, a lot.
Definitely.
See you guys soon.
Bye.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.